And before this video begins, I would just like to thank my Asbantium level patron, Foul and Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. How do you make the perfect jumping on episode for Doctor Who? My editor Duncan recently posed this question to me, and it really got me thinking. How do you make a perfect jumping on point for such a historic and complicated show? There are so many moving parts in Doctor Who, it's often hard to know where to begin. But with every new era acting as a clean slate, it's usually down to a singular episode to introduce everything and serve as a singular point of entry anyone can hop into and get hooked on. So today, I wanted to have a look at all 5 of the modern episodes that serve this purpose. From Rose to Church on Ruby Road, Cracks in Walls to Goblin Kings, the start of each Doctor Who era needs to achieve a few specific goals to succeed. And luckily for you, I've put them into a numbered list, and we're going to explore how each episode succeeds or fails in these categories. Therefore, without further ado, here's how to make the perfect Doctor Who introduction. Step 1. Introduce the companion first. When Series 1 started with Rose all the way back in 2005, it did something very new for the show. It introduced the companion first, turning the titular Rose into an audience surrogate of sorts by showing the entire episode through her eyes. Of course, this was also the approach An Unearthly Child did way at the start, but nothing quite did it in the same way as Rose, which is incredibly effective, because any questions the audience has, Rose has. It's part of why Rose is one of the absolute best jumping on points even 20 years later, because it takes this approach of anchoring the whole episode to the new human character who asks all the questions for the viewer. And it's a format every subsequent jumping on episode has attempted to replicate, to varying levels of success. The pilot does it exceptionally, following the exact blueprint with the equally normal and everyday character Bill, and it achieves the same success as Rose, perfectly establishing who she is and what her character is like. Woman Who Fell to Earth and Church on Ruby Road attempt to do the same, having the companion or companions the first people we meet and the central focus of the narrative, although in those cases the character writing is significantly weaker, but the framework is still clearly there. The main anomaly of this step is the 11th hour. Amy isn't the first person we see, making it the exception to the rule. She isn't quite the same character type as the others. However, the story is still heavily about Amy, and she does still ask a lot of those same audience surrogate questions. So it still fits the wider idea of introducing and establishing the companion before anyone else, to make the audience feel represented and give them something to hold on to. Step 2. Introducing the Doctor. So you have your companion, but now you have to introduce the titular Doctor. After all, the show is called Doctor Who, so arguably the most important step for an introductory episode is to establish the outright main character. Rose once again does this incredibly effectively by making the Doctor an interloper in Rose's life and a puzzle to solve, because he's so mysterious and a big part of the story is her trying to track him down and discover his secrets, again because she's the audience surrogate. And this is where Church on Ruby Road falls short, because it mishandles the introduction of the Doctor. It tries to balance both Ruby and the Doctor as point of view characters, but it doesn't do it well enough to succeed at introducing or establishing both. Having both perspectives doesn't gel or mix together in a cohesive way that works for the viewer, because they're competing as protagonists rather than complementing each other. Take the 11th hour for a good example of this. We're introduced to a snippet of the Doctor. What's going on? Who is he? Who knows? Because we're soon thrown into the perspective of young Amelia Pond meeting this strange man, learning about his eccentric nature, and then seeing him in action. But before long, the Doctor becomes our point of view once more, returning to find a grown-up Amy, and that's what the 11th hour is. This beautiful perpetual dance introducing 2 complex characters at the same time. By the end of it, you know exactly who these people are and why they're about to start traveling together. And the pilot is just as, if not more effective in my opinion, because it introduces the Doctor through the eyes of Bill and establishes their relationship long before they start facing threats together. A really unique direction to take it in, and one that works effortlessly as a character establishment of the Doctor. You need to emphasize the mystery of the character, how unconventional and alien they are, whilst also giving them a twinkle in the eye and a sense of adventure, all within one episode. Step 3. A minor threat. But in an episode where you're introducing so much, it's imperative that you avoid an overly elaborate villain. Let's look at the pilot here. In this episode, we meet Bill. We meet the Doctor, we establish their dynamic and life at the university. And then we get our mystery, a puddle Bill's love interest Heather is obsessed with. After this, we get our threat, as Heather becomes a relentless puddle entity chasing them wherever they go, culminating in a simple love story of Heather having to let Bill go. It's incredibly simple and basic, because it doesn't need to be complicated. It has to prioritize the character dynamics and introductions first, with a straightforward and easily understood villain to frame it all and give the plot the necessary progression. All you need to know is that it's a puddle girl. Same with Rose's shop window dummies, or the 11th Hour's shape-shifting fugitive. And Woman Who Fell to Earth also manages to get this right, with a villain who can basically just be summed up as Predator. It's all easily understandable and able to be summed up in just a few words, so you don't need to be taking notes to understand it all. It's the perfect way to establish how Doctor Who has different monsters of the week. What you don't want to do, then, is what Church on Ruby Road does, and have the villains a group of time-travelling goblins in a pirate ship trying to feed babies to a goblin king and somehow capable of rewriting time completely. Don't do this. It's bad. It's too complex and too abstract for an introductory episode, because you're having to get to know all these new characters whilst also trying to figure out what the plot even is and how it all works. The goblins on their own aren't necessarily bad, but when you add in all the coincidence stuff and the time travelling and the introductions of the characters and the fact it's a usually fun and light Christmas special, it makes them a horrendous introductory threat. It causes everything to be too complicated and too overwhelming, so they're the complete opposite of something like the Autons, who simply want to invade Earth, and that's all you need to know about them. So it's absolutely essential that you need to make the threat something basic and accessible, because the threat is not the focus. Step 4. Essential exposition. Something else that isn't the focus, but absolutely essential, is the exposition about certain elements of the show, like the sonic screwdriver, or the Doctor being an alien, all that kind of stuff. It's not as important as the characters themselves, but usually it's easiest to establish these things as early as possible. Woman Who Fell to Earth does a brilliant job introducing the sonic screwdriver, showing the Doctor building it from the ground up, even if it does make no sense how she does that. The 11th Hour, on the other hand, completely destroys the Sonic before reintroducing it at the end, a process that equally establishes its importance and presence within the show. And you also have to consider how these episodes need to slip in some exposition introducing major story arcs, like the crack in Amy's wall or the vault underneath St. Luke's, just sprinkling in these important aspects that will only grow throughout the series. But you need to be careful about it. Again, look at Church on Ruby Road, which is heavily tied to the overall story arc in a way that distracts from the narrative of the episode as an introduction. It tries setting up too many things in too much of an obvious way, like Ruby's mysterious origin or Mrs. Flood, so it all drags down the plot with its exposition and setup. Compare that to the Series 5 crack, which seems like a normal part of the plot to begin with, but the end shows it's clearly something more important. So it's a tease of what's to come and it grips you naturally, rather than literally having to look directly at the camera and tell you it's going to be important. Step 5. Introducing the Tardis. You have your companion. You have your eccentric, mysterious Doctor. You even have your monster for them to outsmart and defeat, but you also have to introduce the most important symbol of the show, the Tardis. Well, unless you're Woman Who Fell to Earth, which completely omitted the iconic blue box, introducing it in the next episode. A novel idea, to be sure, but one that missed the mark because of how it was handled. However, the TARDIS is once again where the pilot shines as one of the best introductions, because of how it introduces the TARDIS specifically. Right away, it's a point of interest in the Doctor's office, something strange and unnatural that Bill and the audience picks up on as not quite belonging or making sense. Then we get hints that it's somehow moved, before we get the reveal of it being bigger on the inside. Then when we've recovered from that bombshell, we find out it can travel in space. And right as we're dealing with that, it turns out it can travel in time too. Those are all three main features of the TARDIS established within one chase sequence in the middle of an episode, completely efficiently and in a brilliantly engaging way. It simply shows you all you need to know. The 11th Doctor does something slightly different again, keeping us out of the TARDIS for almost the whole episode, so we don't quite understand fully what it is or how it works, before we're given that enthusiastic ending where we see this incredible machine through Amy's eyes as the Doctor explains its capabilities with a sense of awe and wonder, a great use of words over actions. It's very important to establish how the TARDIS works right away, because it's such a core dynamic of the show as a whole. Although, again, you need to be careful not to handle it like Church on Ruby Road does, where it basically expects you to already know and strips away the sense of wonder, negating it by the time Ruby actually enters it for the first time at the very end. Step 6. Setting the tone. But it's not just about introducing characters or objects. An introductory story is also wholly responsible for establishing the tone of a series or the era as a whole. Once again, let's look at the 11th hour. When people talk about Series 5 or the 11th Doctor's era, they often use the term fairy tale, and that's abundantly clear from the very beginning. The 11th hour is very much a fairy tale story of an imaginary friend coming to life and saving Amy from the scary shape-shifting monster. The visuals, the music, the tone as a whole is exactly what Series 5 is defined by, and it's all present within this very first episode. It immediately establishes the tone of the series as a fairy tale adventure into the stars, and that's one of the reasons it's seen as the best introduction of them all, because it instantly shows you what to expect tonally. Rose is very much the same, a perfect encapsulation of the punchy, action-packed and very campy 2000s atmosphere that defines Series 1. You need your introductory episode to do this, because people will usually make their minds up then and there if they want to watch it at all. If you don't do a good job at setting the tone, then you might lose most of your potential viewers right from the beginning. It's why it's probably best to not write the first episode first, because you might not fully comprehend what the rest of the episodes will feel like or what their tone will be. So if you wait until you know, you can do a much better job at setting the tone and giving people a proper feel for what's to come if they stick with the show. It's like how in Series 5 they actually filmed the Angel two-parter first, and then filmed the 11th hour once Matt Smith was more comfortable in the role, so it gave him a much better and more secure start. Step 7. The Doctor moment. Lastly, but definitely not least, is one of the most absolutely important parts of any Doctor's first story, which in most cases includes these jumping on points. The so-called Doctor moment. It's hard to describe exactly what this is, but every Doctor Who fan immediately knows what you mean when you say it. It's a particular moment in an episode where the main character essentially proves themselves as worthy of being the Doctor. A standout moment where we can see the main traits of the character on display. Usually a speech or a triumphant victory where we're shown their bravery, their defiance, their intelligence, or any of these important character elements that define the Doctor. And, like the last point, it sets the tone for their characterization as a whole. Think of the 11th Doctor on the rooftop. He's defeated the enemy, he's cobbling together his eccentric outfit, and he gives his rousing speech to the Atraxi as the music ramps up to a triumphant crescendo. It's a scene that sums up the Doctor as a character, showing how they're humanity's defender, and this is another in a long, consistent line of incarnations. It's just purely a moment where you go, yep, that's the Doctor. And it's common in the other episodes too, like Women Who Fell to Earth's crane scene, or the 9th Doctor's speech to the Nestene consciousness. They're all moments that prove the Doctor worthy of being our main character, and it's usually a climactic moment that ties it all together and brings the story home. It's the culmination of introducing the Doctor and setting the tone. all distilled into one triumphant moment where you can point and say, "The Doctor is here." Doctor Who is something so massive, so historic. It's understandably quite daunting for newcomers. And that's why jumping on episodes are so important, because they establish everything a new viewer needs to know about the show. Whether that be Series 1, Series 5, Series 10 or Series 11, they all offer an opportunity for fresh eyes to hop on board without needing to catch up on a lot of baggage. You can't easily jump into the show with Series 2 or Series 8 for example, because you need a bunch of context to understand what's going on there. But when there's a brand new era with a new showrunner or a new cast, like we so often get in such a long-running show, it's imperative to treat it like a complete clean slate and build everything back up again. It doesn't matter if the show has been off air for 16 years, like it was with Rose, or if it's just a new showrunner, like with The Woman Who Fell to Earth or The 11th Hour. You have to offer these opportunities to keep Doctor Who fresh and appealing. The 7 steps I explored in this video are all core components needed for these episodes to exist. You can see how episodes like Rose or The 11th Hour use them and succeed immensely, whilst Church on Ruby Road, for example, fails as an introductory episode because it doesn't use them, or it fails at handling them properly. Writing Doctor Who is its own unique art form, and believe me, I've tried. But even within that niche art form, the jumping on point is extra difficult because you have to balance so much all at once. But when it's done right, like an ordinary young woman at uni finding out her tutor is a time-travelling alien and her girlfriend is a sentient puddle, it's fantastic, and breathes such a beautiful sense of life into the show with a proper clean slate and the feeling of, here we go again. There's nothing like showing one of these introductory episodes to a non-fan and watching their eyes light up with wonder as they fall in love with the show just like you yourself did however long ago it was. And that's why it's so important to get these episodes right, because everyone remembers their first, so you better make it a good first impression. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to give a special thank you to my Asbantium level patron, Fowlon Cortez, my Platinum level patron, Matthew Burns, and all my Gold level patrons, Ben Salmon, Chris Douglas, Daniel Shillito, and Seb Falcon. Thank you so much for your support.